It's Wednesday. You know what that means. Hi everyone and welcome back to What the H Are You Reading? I'm your host, Brian Hines. Now What the H Are You Reading is a satellite show of my comic book review show, Comic Book Issues, where I take a comic a week and give you a month's worth of quickie reviews. Today it's January 2020. I apologize if this one's a little late, but the editing on my Alien Alchemy review took a little longer than expected. So let's dive right into Week 1, Future State, Superman of Metropolis #1. For the next month or two, DC is going to be putting out a bunch of miniseries that are set in the near future of the DC Universe, all rolling out of the Death Metal event. But there's not going to be any real connecting event or crisis in the Future State books. They're just set in DC's next possible future. Superman of Metropolis shows a 20-something John Kent assuming his father's identity of Superman and becoming the new protector of Metropolis City. The United States Army is on the outskirts of Metropolis as the city is becoming more and more lawless, as the citizens use this nanotechnology called brain cells. Brain cells is actually an AI developed from Brainiac. Since the army and brain cell zealots are about to unleash war upon each other, Jonathan has to take drastic actions. He removes brain cells, actually a giant green orb with multiple mouths that can talk to him, and shrinks the entire city, thus separating the two sides from one another. However, that puts him at odds with brain cells, the US Army, and even his cousin Supergirl. Everyone thinking he's gone too far and that since he's only half human, he's not worthy of his father's legacy as Superman. The story by Sean Lewis, with art by John Timms, plays on the idea of Jonathan Kent as a legacy hero, and that somehow being half human means he'll inherently fail at being Superman. But because he's only half human, everyone seems to underestimate John, and that means he's truly capable of surprising people, such as pulling a can door of Metropolis and shrinking it into a bottle. But he's also capable of being outsmarted by brain cells and being beaten up by Supergirl. It's an interesting but difficult position for John Kent to be in. How do you live up to Superman's legacy? How do you live up to being the son of the greatest hero the world has ever known? The art by John Timms has an overly cartoony feel that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the story, but honestly, it isn't bad enough to be distracting. It's basically fine. Now, this is an oversized comic and runs for $5.99, and it has two backup stories in it. The first story follows Shiloh Norman, the second Mr. Miracle. He's trapped inside Metropolis, but he and the citizens don't realize they've been shrunk. They only know that this giant barrier has appeared around the city. With his super-intelligent mother box computer almost out of power, Shiloh is desperate to try and figure out what's happened to Metropolis. This story is written by Brandon Easton and drawn with some really amazing minimalist art by Valentina De Landro. Finally, Sean Lewis writes the backup story for The Guardian with art by Cully Hamner and Michael Avon Oeming. The new Guardian, an African-American EMT, we never get his real name, has assumed the blue costume and yellow shield. He's trying to calm down riots in the city as people are trying to break out of the glass, all egged on by an anti-capitalist slash graffiti artist slash terrorist named Honest Mary. Guardian tries to get the lay of Metropolis when he meets with Jimmy Olsen, but Jimmy gets kidnapped, and it's later revealed that Honest Mary took him, so now the Guardian has to find Jimmy Olsen. But with no superpowers and time running out, the Guardian may not be able to save Superman's pal before Honest Mary kills him. Of the three comics in this book, this one is the least interesting. It's mostly all action, but there's so much introspection and inner monologue from the Guardian that the action feels stunted and delayed. Lewis is going for tension, but honestly it's just kind of boring. That in this first issue doesn't really give us an origin for the new Guardian. We don't even know his name. Hamner and Oeming are two of the best artists in the industry, and their work here is pretty consistently great, so at least the story is fun to look at. Overall, you do get a hell of a lot of story for $6, but keep in mind the next issue is also going to be $6. Nothing here is incredibly remarkable. Everything's decent, not great. You'd be better off waiting for a collection or a digital sale down the line instead of spending $12 to read some okay stories, like I did. For week 2, we have King in Black, Thunderbolts #1. I admit it, this episode has a lot of miniseries I'm reviewing, but that's just the way it is sometimes. Currently spinning out of Donny Cates' Venom series is the King in Black, an event where Null, the god of all alien symbiotes, is invading the Earth and dropping slime suits on everyone it can. To that end, the mayor of New York City, Wilson Fisk, has formed a new team of Thunderbolts. While the idea has varied over the years, essentially the Thunderbolts have always been villains acting as heroes, sometimes to fool and trick other heroes, sometimes to act as a sort of redemption program for those not too far gone down the path of villainy. This is not that. As it opens, Fisk is mourning the Thunderbolts who died in a successful mission to fight Null. We then cut to a few days earlier. Fisk is sending a team of criminals, now unmasked, and using the Thunderbolts' name to act as his superhero team and talk to the one man who might have an idea on how to stop the symbiotes. Essentially, they're still all villains, but this is a PR stunt for Fisk that might actually pay off and do some good. The team includes Star, a Captain Marvel villain who recently had her own miniseries, Taskmaster, soon to be seen in the Black Widow movie if it ever actually comes out, Mr. Fear, the Rhino, Bartok the Leaper, Snakehead, and Ampere. And if you don't know who the last two are, that's not really surprising. They're cannon fodder and get killed in the first issue. This all happens in the first issue as the alien symbiotes are covering New York City and they're trying to make their way across the city to meet with their contact. Also, Rhino decides he doesn't want to be a part of the team and walks off, and since he's big, no one stops him. The story by Matthew Rosenberg is plenty bleak, and the series gives off a Suicide Squad vibe, especially with those early deaths. The art by Juan Varea gives off a Mark Texiera vibe. It's really amazing. He's truly gifted with expressions and draws wonderful backgrounds, fight scenes, and monsters. He also handles the colors for this book and uses a lot of gray tones, highlighted by the reds in people's costumes and also the red sky set during the alien invasion. The man they're sent to see is really a surprise, although maybe he shouldn't have been. I'm not going to spoil it for you. Fortunately, Thunderbolts, even with no ties to the previous Thunderbolts titles, reads like a Marvel version of the Suicide Squad, and you get the dark humor of selfish people trying to do good in a terrible situation, along with some really good art. I like what I'm seeing enough that I'm going to keep reading this miniseries the whole way through. For week 3, it's Superman Worlds of War #1. So while John is busy living up to his father's legacy in Metropolis, where actually is Clark Kent? We start in Smallville, where we see a bus get off at a Superman festival. There are people who treat Clark as a prophet. You get to meet his former girlfriend and get an autograph. Learn to play a Kryptonian tune on the recorder. We follow a young lady who gets off the bus and meets up with a bunch of other people, all survivors who were saved by Clark Kent at one time in their lives. They all talk about how he saved their lives. They wonder where he is now. But the girl realizes this isn't for her. None of them have hope that Superman will ever come back. We then cut to Warworld, the planet-sized battle station ruled by the giant yellow alien Mongol, who presides over a gladiator pit. There, dragged out in a cage, is Clark Kent, Superman. And as he fights to protect his fellow gladiators, we cut back to the girl. Her name is Sadie, and she promises never to forget Clark Kent. The story, which is much quicker than the one in Superman on Metropolis, mostly focuses on the legacy of Clark. How people are all focused on the hyped-up mythology of Superman and ignoring the much more normal life of Clark Kent. Written by Philip Kennedy Johnson with some very nice detailed art by Mikhail Janin, it's a nice examination of the Man of Steel, a deconstruction of who he was. The art really gets a chance to shine as people try and figure out what happened to Superman or have flashbacks about how he saved their lives from aliens or supervillains or what have you. My only regret is that we only spent 4 pages with Superman on Warworld, and honestly, the cover hyped a John Carter take on Superman, and that was the main reason why I picked up this book. Don't get me wrong, the story's very good, but they sold me on this Superman gladiator thing, and they only delivered 4 pages of it. Also, this story wasn't any longer than any of the backup tales. Since it's the main story in the Superman Worlds of War comic, shouldn't the Superman Worlds at War story have been longer than the other ones? But that might just be a minor quibble on my part. The backup tale is the second Mr. Miracle story in the Future State comics. Now, spoiler, at the end of Superman and Metropolis #2, he gets teleported out of Metropolis and winds up here on Warworld, which is where this story picks up. It's even the same creative team, writer Brandon Easton and artist Valentin Delandro. Now with his mother box fully charged up, he's in an abattoir. Literally thousands of alien corpses are being processed. He escapes this death pit and finds the gladiator pits. Out of nowhere, he runs into the Midnighter, formerly of the Authority, who mentions that Shiloh should contact the JLA and rescue Clark Kent. Oh, also Mr. Miracle's been missing for a few years. Shiloh eventually finds an airlock, and upon leaving the ship, sees that Warworld is now surrounded by a fleet of warships. The third story actually is The Midnighter by Becky Cloonan and Michael W. Conrad with art by Gleb Melnikov. To paraphrase someone I used to work with, be glad that I read this comic book so you don't have to. The art is awful. Scratchy and overly cartoony. Now I admit art is subjective, but this is my review, so you're just going to have to listen to what I think about it. Midnighter is crawling around Warworld for a mysterious benefactor. There's a bunch of stupid-looking cyborgs, including one with a whirling gun for a dick. And yeah, a bunch of stuff happens, but honestly, I don't care enough to tell you. The end was predictable and weak. And there's one final story, The Black Racer. In the Warworld processing pits, where dead bodies are stripped of valuables, Mongol servants find a girl alive in a cryopod. Written by Jenny Adams and drawn by C.M. The girl, Tanda, was known as the Black Racer. She competed in a sort of giant mecha roller derby. Another racer sabotages her, and she has a brief vision of the Jack Kirby new god named the Black Racer. Her mecha blows, she dies, but she's brought back to life in the aforementioned processing pit. She begins making her way back to the surface of Warworld so she can get revenge on her saboteur, but stops to free a group of slaves. This attracts security, and the story ends on a cliffhanger with a bunch of laser rifles pointed at her. Admittedly, the art in this story is better than the Midnighter one, and can handle action well. And I did like that Tanda's costume, while futuristic looking, contained identifiable elements of the Jack Kirby Black Racer outfit. That said, there's not much story here beyond a basic dead going back for revenge but doing good on the way formula. Overall, Superman Worlds at War is an $8 comic, $2 more than Superman of Metropolis. Yes, we get 4 stories instead of 3, but while the first 2 are pretty good, the third is bad, and the 4 was so-so. And while I can appreciate a comic deconstructing the Superman mythos, it's not the comic I was promised or even wanted, and I really hope we get back to Superman in the gladiator pits of Warworld in the 2nd issue. I want to find out why he's on Warworld, find out why he left Earth, what happened to Lois. I'll give you the same advice as I gave you for Superman of Metropolis. Wait. Get the whole story and get it for cheaper. And finally for week 4, it's New Mutants number 15. New Mutants continues to be the book that either grossly lets me down or unexpectedly makes me happy with joy that I'm a comic book reader. Thankfully, this issue was the latter. We've got a new creative team, and we're already onto the 2nd issue by writer Vida Ayala and artist Rod Rice, doing his best to channel his inner Bill Sienkiewicz. The New Mutants team has decided to step up and acting as mentors and trainers to all the younger mutants now living on Krakoa. Magic is helping some students stand up to bullies. A group of the younger kids, including a mutant who was introduced earlier in the series and whose body was warped by her mutation, have fallen under the spell of the Shadow King. Scout, formerly Honey Badger, X-23's cloned sister, is making a nuisance of herself with Dakin, Wolverine's son. That family tree needs a lot of mental gymnastics. Wolfsbane laments that her half-Asgardian son has not been resurrected on Krakoa, and a party celebrating the marriage of Cypher during the X of Sword events goes awry when the girl with a warped body named Cosmar asks Mirage to kill her in a ritual that would allow her to get her old body back. There's a lot happening in this book with the classic New Mutants at its core, but not the entire cast. And I like that the cracks are starting to show in Krakoa's utopia. There's a whole splash page dedicated to Rain's dead son, and that fills me with glee, because that was an element from Peter David's 2nd X-Factor series, the one focusing on the detective agency, and that is one of my all-time favorite Marvel comic book runs. In fact, I reviewed a couple of issues from that run on Comic Book Issues at one point, so you can probably go through my backlog and find it, which I think you should do. Please go watch all my old episodes. Thank you. Cosmar isn't happy with her new mutant body, and being told that she's perfect just the way she is by a mutant who looks like a supermodel has got to sting a little. Meanwhile, the Shadow King is manipulating these younger kids for a reason we're not sure of yet. In fact, I'm not sure if anyone besides those kids can even see him. There's a lot of good things happening, and this book is finally becoming the New Mutants title I wanted it to be. I'm really happy with Rice's art. Like I said, he's channeling that fluid, yet scratchy Sienkiewicz style, but I believe he's producing it digitally instead of painting it like Bill did. Still, it works for the book. Filling Krakoa with all types of mutants, human, humanoid, and some non-traditional body types. This book has a lot going on, and it might be a bit much for a new reader, but longtime mutant fans like myself are probably going to really enjoy what's happening in New Mutants, and the book is just a visual treat. Okay, my friends, thank you for joining me here on What the H Are You Reading? I'll see you next month for February 2020. Until then, I'm your host, Brian Hines. And remember, join Dark Order.